It's time for me to answer some of your questions. Most of these questions I got from my Discord channel, which you can find a link for in this video's description. It's a fun place to hang out and meet some other people who enjoy this kind of music as well. Some of these questions I got from Facebook, Instagram, and on the YouTube channel as well. So if you have questions for my next Q&A video, which I will do at some point, you can ask them here in the video or come join me on the Discord. First up, I have some questions from Alfonso G. What inspired you to start the Prog School? Well, the first idea for the Prog School came in the beginning of 2020, right before COVID happened. I had an idea to do a music theory channel related to this kind of music specifically. And then when the pandemic hit, I had a ton of free time on my hands for the rest of 2020. So I dedicated that time to kind of planning out the channel as far as what I wanted to do and kind of get an idea for how I wanted to go about it. And that's obviously changed as I've made videos too and kind of seen what works and doesn't work. But for me, I've always been someone who loved prog, obviously, but I also have always enjoyed music theory. And I've had a lot of formal training. I have a traditional kind of classical music degree, and theory has always been something I've really been fascinated by. And I thought it'd be fun to do a music theory channel focused specifically on this kind of music. I'm also a big fan of a lot of the music theory type channels on YouTube. Some of them are more generic, and sometimes they focus on specific styles of music. There's jazz theory channels and video game music channels and movie score music theory channels, all of that. But I thought it'd be fun to do a channel like that, but focus specifically on this kind of music. And then secondly, it was a way to kind of market myself. These days as a self-employed musician, you have to do all kinds of different stuff, teaching, playing, whatever you can do. And having a channel like this is a way to kind of push my services forward as well and get some people to listen to my own music, maybe get some people to come take some lessons from me or check out some of the other things that I do. So all of those reasons are why I started the Prog School. And once I got into it, I kind of found that I really enjoyed making these kind of videos and talking about this stuff. And so I've just kept up with it and tried to be as consistent as possible. Alfonso's other question is, how long does it usually take to transcribe the parts for an analysis video? Now, this can vary a ton. It really depends on what I'm analyzing and how much of it I'm analyzing. For example, the Deer Hunter video I did a couple of years ago, that I was just doing the chords of that song, not all of the other parts of the song. So it probably took me less than an hour to kind of figure out all the chords because it wasn't too complicated. It was interesting, but not too insane. Whereas like the latest analysis video I did for the Periphery song, Zagreus, where I did the entire song and all the different elements, melody, harmony, rhythm, all of that, that took me probably 5, maybe up to 10 hours to analyze. With things like that are so much more complicated and dense, and if I'm dealing with all the parts of the song, it can take much longer. So everyone kind of varies a little bit. But I think the more complex part is actually figuring out how I'm going to teach that. So once I transcribe it and I've figured out how to play it myself or to count it myself, I then have to take the next step of being able to explain what's happening from a theoretical perspective. So that takes a long time as well. It's like, okay, I figured this part out, but how am I going to show how this part works, and be able to explain it in a way that makes some kind of sense. It's a range, really, when it comes to this stuff. Could take me an hour or two, could also take up to a dozen hours. It kind of really depends on what I'm analyzing. Ashley asks, why do you downtune your 7-string and 8-string? So I got a 7-string when I joined A Sense of Gravity. A lot of their songs were using 7 strings. At the time, I only had a 6-string, so I figured, hey, it's time to bite the bullet and get a 7-string. And all of the Sense of Gravity songs are in drop A. So for me to learn the songs for the audition, I actually borrowed a friend's 7-string. I needed a 7-string, obviously, to play the material. And so I just kind of stuck with that tuning as I started writing my own music with a 7-string. What I think I really like about it is that you get a standard tune guitar on the top 6 string, so I can do all my normal 6-string stuff, because I usually play in standard on a 6-string, but then down here, you have a drop tuning. Do all your drop D style power chords. So I can do, traditional power chords here on the E and A string. And then on the low string, and that also works for bigger chords too. I can do like extended, 7th chords. very easily by barring that finger down and involve all 7 strings in the chord process. And then the 8-string tuning is just an extension of this as well. So the low string on the 8th string I have tuned as E. So you have E, A, and then a standard tuned guitar all the way up. So you have E, A, E, A. Basically I can do anything on a standard 6-string guitar an octave down on the 8th string. I like the 7th string because I can stay an octave above the bass guitar, a 5-string bass guitar for the most part. And then with the 8th string, I can be in the same octave as the bass. My tunings for extended range guitars are based on just stacking on what I already have. So I'm using a standard tuning most of the time on a 6th string, stack on that dropped A for the 7th string, and then stack on the E below that. That way I can keep the shapes and riffs and stuff I do with less strings the same, and then just add those extra low notes as I need them. Next up, we have a question from the Cool Guitar Dude, which I promise is not me asking myself a question. He asks, why prog? What drew you to that style and not something else? And who's influenced you the most? So when it comes to choosing to do prog, at least for the most part, I think part of it was a way to combine the rock music that I first loved when I started playing guitar, power chords and distortion and big amps, and then combine that with the more intellectual music I was learning later on, especially when I went to music school, classical music, jazz, all of that. And prog to me is kind of this like high art meets low art thing. For me, that was really fun because I could work out all my chops and all the technical things I was working on, but I could do it through an amp with distortion and still playing riffs. So it just worked for me personally. I did a video a couple months ago on my top 10 albums of all time. So if you really want to get a feel for the things that influenced me the most, you can watch that video. When it came to prog, it was bands like Dream Theater and Symphony X and Rush, Pain of Salvation, Porcupine Tree, Pink Floyd, like a lot of the classic kind of prog stuff. And then I had a big influence from fusion music as well, a lot of guitar players in the fusion realm, as well as a lot of the instrumental guitarists like Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, Eric Johnson, all of that. So I have a pretty wide variety of influences across lots of different styles. But if you want a little bit more on that, you can check out that video where I did my top 10 albums. Next up is a question from my good friend Esteban. He asked, what are the 3 things that make something prog? The first would be experimentation. Now you might think I'd say technique, and that can be a part of prog, but it's not a part of all kinds of prog. I think experimentation is part of it, or I guess progression, right? The word progressive. And for me, it's musicians that are really exploring something different and maybe it's not always the case, especially now, but in the early prog stuff, there's a lot of exploration and trying things out and messing with new different sounds, whether it's different instruments or different techniques, all that kind of stuff. So that's one element, is experimentation. The second thing I'm going to say is music that goes somewhere you wouldn't expect. So maybe you expect something to be in 4/4, but in prog you have a different time signature, or you're expecting a verse, chorus, basic structure, and in prog you're going to have something totally different. That might be a really long song or just something unexpected. And that was one of the things that drew me to prog, was not knowing exactly where the music was going to go. And it doesn't really matter what kind of prog it is, the music will go places that you wouldn't expect. Like you're like, okay, I was not expecting it to do that tempo shift or to go to this style of music, whatever it happens to be. And that works across all the different kinds of prog. So I think that for the second thing, I'd say music that goes somewhere you wouldn't expect. For the third thing that makes something prog, I'm going to say sophistication. And I think that's a way for me to include a lot of the technical elements of prog, but not exclude the musicians that aren't super technical that do this kind of music. Not all of prog is like super shreddy, but a lot of it is sophisticated, or most of it is very sophisticated as far as like interesting chord progressions and arrangements, maybe interesting instrumentation, complex chords or rhythms, and then some prog, which is super technical, which is also very sophisticated. I think that's a way to kind of describe all of prog while not excluding certain musicians. So I'll say sophistication. Cameron C asks, are there any specific video game OSTs you like or inspired by? And there are a few. A lot of them are games that I've played, or games from my childhood. So all of the old Nintendo stuff, that's an inspiration, definitely in some way. Or like Halo, which I played a bunch when I was younger. GoldenEye. A lot of the classics for people my age as far as video games go. Some more modern ones. I really love the soundtrack for Ori and the Will of the Wisps, which is an awesome Metroidvania kind of 2D platformer, really, really good. But the music from that is absolutely beautiful and really captures the mood of the visual style of that game. Another soundtrack I really like is the soundtrack for a game called Dante's Inferno, which I actually haven't played the game, but the soundtrack is awesome. It sounds like, going to hell, really dark and orchestral, tons of choirs. Definitely worth checking out. Other soundtracks that have inspired me would be games that I've put tons of time into recently, like Breath of the Wild or Skyrim or The Witcher 3. Games where you sink hundreds of hours into them, obviously the soundtracks are going to be somewhat influential to you in that case. Mike Myers asks, which is his real name by the way, which is awesome, developing a good right hand for metal rhythm guitar. Now this is a pretty big subject, but if we're talking about the right hand specifically, the things I focus are on evenness in the timing, as well as articulation and dynamics. Just being able to go and palm mute nice and hard with an even tone and consistency. That's really the first step, and you can record yourself and look and see how you are on the grid as far as being as even as possible. I think of the right hand when it comes to this kind of riffing as being like a drummer. Basically, it's a rhythm instrument. I mean, there's some notes happening, but more than anything, it's rhythm. So think about how a drummer would play, rudiments or play stickings and all that kind of stuff, where they do accents and things like that. So you can accent every 4 notes, for example. And then, of course, where you're palm muting and not palm muting is a good exercise. And then I'll start to incorporate some of those gallops, 16th notes in there. I might do some longer flurries of 16th notes. Always focusing on the evenness. I can do different note subdivisions from 8th notes to triplets to 16th notes. So there's lots of different rhythmic exercises you can do. It's also worth exploring some of these things on different strings. So I might do a gallop type rhythm. Just to get used to how it feels going on different parts of the guitar. And then of course, if there's riffs you really like that focus on the right hand, those are great to learn as well. Here's a rhythm from one of my upcoming songs, for example, and this isn't really spoiling anything because it's just one note. Riffs like that are real muscle burners, so if there's something like that you really enjoy, it's definitely worth trying to learn. Next up is Brian from Critical Reactions, who I did a big talk with a few weeks ago. He asks, what's the weirdest, least well-known, or most obscure instrument that you want to learn how to play? Honestly, I'm kind of vanilla when it comes to the instruments that I want to play personally, but there are some stringed instruments that I'd be interested to try out. I've always wanted to learn how to play the sitar, which isn't really that obscure. But there's also the Greek bouzouki. I've seen a lot of videos of that. I think is really cool. Anything where I could easily transfer over the skills I already have would be really fun for me. I'm not that interested in playing a bunch of weird instruments from a personal perspective. I am interested in weird instruments from a composition perspective. There's a lot of virtual instruments I have that deal with a lot of obscure instruments from around the world, and I find that really fascinating to write for. So maybe more from a composition perspective, I'm interested in obscure instruments than I am from a playing perspective. Honestly, if I was going to play another instrument right now, I'd probably pick up the drums. I think that's the instrument that I'm most interested in. Lastly, we have Curtis, who is a longtime follower of the channel. He asks, what's your long-term vision for the channel and what do you hope it evolves into? Honestly, not too much different from what I'm already doing. I kind of want to just expand on the things I've built already. I'd like to do some more interviews and do some more collaborative kind of things. I'm thinking of bringing some guest teachers in every once in a while to do different instruments, bass, drums, keyboards, vocals, all of that. Because I don't really want this to be a guitar-related channel. It's much more of a music theory channel and prog channel overall. But honestly, you'll probably see similar content from me going forward, just trying to lean into the things that people really enjoy and the things that I really enjoy talking about and the things that I enjoy making. Curtis also asks, how is the new album coming along? Have you had time to work on it with the gigging season starting up? So the album is done. I have it completely written. I'm just trying to figure out the logistics of how to get it out. So I'm trying to find the right musicians to play it. I want as many real musicians playing this time as possible. I'm also trying to figure out what I'm going to do for the production side of things. I think I'm going to have this one mixed and mastered professionally. I feel pretty comfortable in my abilities now, but for this one, I kind of want to do it outside of myself because I'm so involved in the kind of process of writing this one. But I'm really excited about the music that's going to be on this next full length. I just want to do it properly. So I'm trying to figure out all the logistics of doing that, make sure I get the right people involved there. In the meantime, I'll probably put out some singles, and I have another big project that's going to be more self-produced that I'll probably do before my next full-length album comes out. But it's really not the gigging or anything that's keeping me from doing it. It's just trying to do it as properly as possible. Thank you all so much for your questions. I am planning a few more Q&A videos, so if you have questions for me, leave them in the comments, or you can come ask me on Facebook, Instagram, or even better, come join the Discord. That's probably the best place to do this. And if you like what I do here, subscribe, hit the bell notification, like, comment, share. Till next time, stay proggy.